Hiccups at part load. Kia Sportage 1.6 GDI BusinessPlusLine Engine code G4FD-1591 cubic centimeters, 4 cylinders, 2015 Petrol. The engine of this car stutters or jerks at part load around 2,500 revolutions per minute. A completely new engine has been installed, and the spark plugs, catalytic converter, and lambda sensors have also been replaced. The engine computer does not display any error codes, which makes it difficult to find cause. The engine management system does not provide a clear warning, and the usual misfire registration in the live data shows no deviations. The cause, therefore, probably lies in factors such as the adjustment of the fuel and air supply, the ignition under load, software problems, or mechanical problems that go beyond the basic components already replaced. This petrol engine with the internal code G4FD and a cylinder capacity of approximately 1.6 liters is one of the direct injection engines of this brand and type. This engine family was produced worldwide from approximately the beginning of 2011 to approximately the end of 2019 in various models and versions. Complaints can be found on the internet about contamination of the intake by soot and oil fumes, irregular running at certain loads, knocking or detonation, sensitive knocking at low speeds, problems with the timing chain in some examples, and sometimes software-related complaints about throttle response and the transition from part load to full load. Especially in direct injection petrol engines, it often happens that the intake valves become dirty because the fuel no longer flushes properly over the valves, causing oil and soot to accumulate. This can manifest itself in stuttering at certain loads and speeds without clear error codes. A structured diagnosis and repair plan always starts with a very accurate test drive. A technician with experience with this engine type is connected to a professional diagnostic tester to monitor live data when the problem occurs. This makes it possible to determine exactly which parameters are changing at that moment, such as the position of the throttle valve, the air mass measurement, the fuel pressure, the short and long-term fuel correction, the ignition timing, the lambda signals, and, if necessary, the control of exhaust gas recirculation and other functions. It is important that the problem is reproducible, for example, in a certain gear with a stable speed around that moment. The equipment used should not only consist of general readout devices, but preferably also a brand-specific tester that can look deeper into the specific data of this engine. Because the spark plugs, catalytic converter, and lambda sensors are already new, it is necessary to look further at parts that can cause a malfunction without immediately generating an error code, such as the air mass meter, a small false air leak in the intake duct, a slightly dirty or malfunctioning high-pressure fuel pump or fuel pressure regulator, small deviations in the injectors, or the transition between the open and closed control loop of the engine management system around that speed. A first step in the workshop can be to check all intake and vacuum hoses for leaks or cracks. Check all plugs, ground points, and wiring harnesses around the engine and the engine management system. Measure the fuel pressure, both low and high pressure, at part load, and test the air mass meter and throttle bodies for contamination and correct operation. Because a completely new engine has been installed, it is extra important to check whether all parts from the old engine that have been transferred correspond to the specifications of a new engine, and whether the software in the engine computer corresponds exactly to this version of the engine and this year of manufacture of the vehicle. A minor software error can lead to minor malfunctions without clear error codes, especially at part load. Therefore, checking the software version of the engine computer and, if necessary, updating it to the latest version of the brand is also an important part of the diagnosis. Some known problems have been resolved over the years through software adjustments. In addition, with direct injection petrol engines of this type, contamination of the intake tract and valves must be seriously taken into account, especially when the car has been driven for a long time before the engine has been replaced, or when only the engine block is new, but the intake tract and parts such as the intake manifold and valves have not been cleaned. This means that the new engine still suffers from old pollution. An inspection with an endoscope in the intake tract near the valve can help to assess whether there are many carbon deposits present and, if necessary, cleaning of the intake tract and valves can be carried out, for example with walnut shells. This provides a noticeable improvement in the idling and part load behavior of many engines with direct injection. Known problems with this car and this engine type mentioned on the internet include, in addition to contamination of the intake manifold, a relatively sensitive fuel injection system, where poor quality gasoline or many short journeys contaminate the injection system, causing minor irregularities. Sometimes there are complaints about pinging or rattling noises in hot weather or low engine speeds due to a combination of direct injection and outdated software. In some cases, there are problems with the timing chain or chain tensioner at higher mileage, which manifests itself in rattling on cold starts and irregular ignition timing. It is also reported that some drivers complain of constant speed jerking around certain engine speeds, which diminished after a software update or resetting of the throttle and adaptation values. In terms of maintenance, a minor service for this car usually consists of changing the engine oil and oil filter, checking and, if necessary, topping up all fluids, checking the tires, brakes, lights, and a general inspection of the suspension, steering, and exhaust. The costs for this are often between €300 and €500 in parts and labor, depending on the garage and the region. In addition to changing the oil and filter, a major service often includes replacing the air filter and cabin filter, checking or replacing the spark plugs, depending on the interval, changing the brake fluid at the prescribed interval, and a more extensive inspection of the chassis and drivetrain. The cost can vary from approximately €500 to over €1,000 when, for example, spark plugs, brake parts, or other wear parts are replaced at the same time. If maintenance costs are considered over a longer period, for example between 10,000 and 200,000 kilometers, one must take into account various minor maintenance services alternating with major maintenance services and some major maintenance work, such as periodically replacing spark plugs, possibly replacing the multi-rib belt and tension rollers, and, at higher mileage, brake discs and brake pads, and possibly shock absorbers. An oil change with filter is wise every 10 to 15,000 kilometers, especially on gasoline engines with direct injection, because cleaner oil better protects the turbo valve train, if equipped, and the timing chain or belt, thus preventing expensive problems in the long term. Parts such as the starter motor, alternator, and shock absorbers have an average lifespan, but this is highly dependent on use. A starter motor often lasts about 100,000 to 300,000 kilometers, an alternator comparable or longer, as long as no overload due to accessories occurs, and shock absorbers often last between 80,000 and 150,000 kilometers in normal use before their performance deteriorates noticeably, and replacement is advisable for driving comfort and safety. The cost of replacing a starter motor is often several €100, including labor. A dynamo costs about the same, and a set of 4 shock absorbers, including installation, can vary from about €600 to well over €1,000, depending on the brand, the type, standard or sporty, and the hourly rate of the garage. In preventive maintenance, it is often recommended not to replace parts that are crucial for safety and reliability only when they are completely defective, but to replace brake pads at the first signs of wear, for example before the brake discs become damaged, to replace shock absorbers when the damping is noticeably reduced, and not to wait for leakage and dangerous road holding to occur, and to have the battery checked, and, if necessary, replaced before it causes starting problems. The hourly wage at an independent garage is often between €60 and €90, while dealers often charge more, up to €80 to €120 per hour, depending on the region and the brand. For future use, and to avoid problems with this engine, it is wise to always refuel with good quality petrol at operating temperature. Regularly make longer journeys to reduce contamination and condensation in the oil and exhaust gases, and not drive for long periods at extremely low speeds and high loads, as this can aggravate complaints of knocking and hesitation. It is also advisable to have the intake duct periodically checked and cleaned where necessary, especially in the event of complaints of stuttering or irregular running, and have software updates carried out by the manufacturer, so that known problems that have been resolved in later calibrations do not unnecessarily recur. When purchasing a used car of this type, a thorough inspection is important. When the engine is cold, check whether the engine noise is not disturbing whether the timing chain is not rattling, whether the engine idles smoothly, and whether there are no stuttering during a test drive, especially at part load around the indicated speed. Also check maintenance records, evidence of timely oil changes, and, if possible, an endoscopic inspection of the intake valves on high-mileage engines. It is also wise to have the car read out with a diagnostic device to check for hidden error codes or noticeable fuel corrections that could indicate contamination or emerging problems. In general, many experience reports on the internet show that this petrol version can be quite reliable, provided maintenance has been carried out correctly and attention has been paid to known weaknesses such as intake contamination and chain noise at higher mileage. In diesel variants of comparable models, on the other hand, problems with particulate filters, EGR systems, and injectors are reported more often, especially during heavy city traffic and short journeys. For those who mainly make short journeys, a petrol version can often be a wiser choice, while for many long highway kilometers a modern diesel can be interesting, provided that maintenance is carried out correctly and on time. If we look at models and engines up to around 2026, later production years within a generation often benefit from small improvements in software and sometimes parts. That is why when purchasing a used car, it is sometimes wise to opt for one from the last years of production of a model series with demonstrable maintenance by the dealer or specialist. Models with known timing chain problems or many reports of oil consumption or problems with the particulate filter are mentioned by many users on forums as models that need to be properly checked or that you may be better off avoiding if you do not want to take any risks. For your current complaint, it is advisable to go through the diagnosis plan step by step with an experienced technician. Start with a reproducible test drive and an extensive analysis of the live data, followed by a check of the intake duct and any false air, a check of the fuel pressure and injection control, a check of the software version and any updates, and finally an inspection and, if necessary, cleaning of the intake valves. By following these steps, there's a good chance that the cause of the part load misfire will be found and corrected, and the new engine will run smoothly and reliably. In this way, future problems are prevented as much as possible through good maintenance and timely inspection.